The chains were cold against Arya Blackwood's wrists, colder than the stone floor beneath her knees. Around her, the great hall of the Crimson Moon Kingdom stood packed with wolves, who had once bowed to her, who had once called her Luna, who had once sworn to protect her with their lives. Now they only stared, waiting for the verdict that everyone in the room already knew was coming. Alpha King Damian Cross sat on his high seat above her, his face carved from stone. His eyes, the deep gold of an alpha's power, refused to meet hers. She had loved those eyes once. She had trusted them. Now they looked at her the way a hunter looks at something already caught in a trap. "Arya Blackwood," Damian said, his voice echoing through the hall. "You stand accused of conspiring with the Ravenwood Pact to end my life. The evidence against you is clear. Do you have anything to say before judgment is passed?" Arya lifted her chin. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back tears she refused to let this court see. "I have said it 100 times, my king. I am innocent. Someone has planted lies against me. I would never betray you. I could never betray you." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Somewhere near the back, she caught sight of Lord Malric, the king's most trusted advisor, standing with his arms folded and a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. It was a look she had seen before, though she had never understood what it meant until this very moment. He was enjoying this. "The letters bearing your seal were found in the Ravenwood camp," Damian said. "Your own guard confessed to carrying messages on your behalf. What more proof does this court need?" "My guard was bribed," Arya said, her voice rising. "Or threatened, or both. Damian, look at me. Look at what we built together. Do you truly believe I would throw it all away to help our enemies?" For one moment, something flickered behind his golden eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or memory. She saw him glance toward Malric, saw the advisor give the smallest shake of his head, and watched the doubt vanish, as quickly as it had come. "I have looked at the evidence," Damian said, his tone hardening again. "I have looked at the witnesses. I have looked at everything, Arya, and everything points to you." "Then look at this," she said, placing both bound hands over her stomach. "Look at what I carry, your child, our child. Would I risk this life, this future, for anything in this world?" The hall fell silent. Even the guards seemed to hold their breath. For the first time since the trial began, Damian's composure cracked. His jaw tightened. His hands gripped the arms of his throne until his knuckles turned white. But when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, and somehow that made it worse. "A child changes nothing," he said. "If anything, it makes your betrayal harder to forgive. You brought an innocent life into a plot against its own father." "There is no plot." Arya's voice cracked with desperation. "Damian, please. Someone in this castle wants me gone. Someone wants to tear us apart. Can you not see that? Can you not feel that something is wrong here?" Her eyes found Malric again. This time, she did not look away. "Ask him," she said, pointing toward the advisor with her chained hands. "Ask Lord Malric where he was the night those letters disappeared from my chamber. Ask him who delivered the so-called witness to your door." Malric's face remained perfectly calm, but Arya saw something shift in his eyes, something sharp and cold, like a blade being drawn just beneath the surface of silk. "My king," he said smoothly, "I understand the Luna's desperation. It is a hard thing to be caught. But throwing accusations at loyal servants will not change the truth of what has been found." Damian said nothing for a long moment. Arya watched him, praying, hoping, waiting for him to remember the years they had shared, the promises whispered in the dark, the future they had planned together. She waited for him to choose her. He did not. "Arya Blackwood," Damian said, rising slowly from his throne. "By the laws of the Crimson Moon Kingdom, and by the power given to me as Alpha King, I strip you of your title as Luna. You are no longer welcome within these borders. You are banished, effective immediately, and forbidden from ever returning." The words struck her harder than any physical blow could have. Banished. Forever. She had expected punishment, perhaps imprisonment, perhaps even worse, but she had never truly believed he would send her away completely. Somewhere in her heart, she had held on to the hope that he still loved her enough to find the truth. "Damian," she whispered, no longer caring who heard the break in her voice. "Please, not like this. Think of our child." "The child will be cared for," Damian said, though his voice wavered slightly on the words. "But you will not raise it within these walls. You will not raise it as royalty. From this day forward, you are nothing to this kingdom." 2 guards stepped forward and pulled her to her feet. She did not fight them. What was the use? The court had already decided her fate, long before she had been dragged into this hall. As they led her toward the great doors, she turned one last time, to look at the man she had loved with everything she had. "One day," she said, her voice steady, despite the tears finally spilling down her cheeks, "you will learn the truth. And when you do, I hope it destroys you, the way this moment is destroying me." Damien did not answer. He simply turned his face away, unable, or unwilling, to watch as she was dragged from the hall that had once been her home. Outside, the sky had turned dark with the promise of a storm. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the mountains as the guards marched Arya toward the kingdom's border, her bare feet dragging against the cold stone path. Villagers who had once greeted her with warm smiles now watched from behind their windows, afraid to be seen showing any sympathy toward a woman condemned by their king. At the edge of the kingdom, where the great iron gates marked the boundary between safety and exile, the guards finally released her chains. One of them, an older wolf named Callum who had served under her for years, hesitated before speaking. "My lady," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else could hear. "I never believed the charges, not for a moment. I am sorry I could not do more to help you." "Thank you, Callum," Arya whispered. "That means more than you know." He pressed something into her hand before stepping back, a small pouch containing a few coins and a strip of dried meat, hardly enough to survive more than a day or two, but it was more kindness than she had received from anyone else in that entire hall. Before the gates fully opened, a young woman pushed through the gathered crowd, tears streaming down her face. It was Isla, one of the kitchen staff who had served Arya faithfully since her earliest days as Luna. She reached out, pressing a small woven blanket into Arya's arms, before a guard roughly pulled her back. "For the little one," Isla whispered, before disappearing into the crowd, unwilling to risk further punishment for her small act of defiance. Arya clutched the blanket tightly, its rough fabric somehow more comforting than anything else she had been given that day. She thought of all the people within these walls who had shown her kindness over the years, people who now watched helplessly as their king carried out a judgment built entirely on lies. She wondered how many of them suspected the truth, how many silently disagreed, but lacked the courage or the standing to speak against Lord Malric's carefully constructed case. She thought, too, of her own family, distant relatives from a smaller pack to the east who had celebrated her rise to Luna with such pride. They would hear of this banishment eventually, and she wondered whether they would believe the accusations or hold on to faith in her innocence. Either way, she knew she could not seek refuge with them. Malric's influence stretched further than most realized, and any pack sheltering the banished Luna would likely face consequences of their own. The gates groaned open, and beyond them stretched miles of dark forest, unfamiliar and unforgiving. Arya took one last look back at the kingdom she had called home, at the towers rising against the stormy sky, at the life she had built and lost in the span of a single afternoon. Then she turned, wrapped her thin cloak tighter around her shoulders, and stepped through the gates into the unknown. The forest swallowed her almost immediately, its shadows deep and its silence heavy. Rain began to fall in cold, sharp drops, soaking through her cloak within minutes. She walked without direction, without purpose, her only goal to put as much distance between herself and the kingdom as her exhausted body would allow. Hours passed. The storm grew worse, lightning splitting the sky above the trees, thunder shaking the ground beneath her feet. Her legs ached, her stomach cramped with hunger, and with something else, something she recognized with growing fear as the first signs of early labor, brought on by stress and exhaustion. "Not yet," she whispered to herself, one hand pressed against her stomach as she stumbled forward. "Please, not yet. Not here." But the pain only intensified, coming in waves that grew closer together with every passing mile. She could feel her strength failing, her vision blurring at the edges, her steps growing unsteady on the muddy forest path. She thought of Damien, of the life they should have had together, of the child who deserved so much better than this cold, wet forest and a mother too weak to protect it. She thought of Lord Malric's calm, satisfied face, and a fresh wave of anger gave her just enough strength to keep moving. "I will survive this," she said through gritted teeth, pushing herself onward despite the pain. "I will survive, And one day, I will make sure the truth comes out. I swear it. She stumbled upon a shallow cave, carved into a hillside sometime past midnight, the rain finally offering a brief reprieve as she crawled inside, grateful for even the smallest shelter from the relentless storm. She wrapped Isla's blanket around herself, pressing her back against the cold stone wall, and tried to steady her breathing as another wave of pain rolled through her body. She thought of the healers back at the castle, of the comfortable birthing chamber that had been prepared for her months earlier, filled with warm blankets and skilled attendants ready to assist. None of that mattered now. She was alone, exiled, with nothing but her own strength and whatever instincts nature had given her to rely upon. "You are strong," she whispered to herself, one hand pressed against her stomach. "Both of you are strong. We will get through this together." The storm raged on around her, indifferent to her pain, indifferent to her promises. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, though she could not yet know it, a new life was waiting for her, one built far from the kingdom that had cast her aside, one that would eventually rise to challenge everything she had lost. But first, she had to survive the night. Her legs finally gave out, just as the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the trees. She collapsed onto the wet earth, her strength completely spent, her body trembling with cold and pain and fear. The last thing she remembered before darkness took her was the sound of footsteps approaching through the underbrush, and a voice, unfamiliar and gentle, calling out to see if anyone was there. Then everything went black. Elsie Vance had not expected to find a body in the middle of the forest when she went out that morning to gather herbs. She had certainly not expected the body to still be breathing, or for it to belong to a woman clearly close to giving birth. But there Arya lay, pale and shivering, her lips tinged blue from the cold, and Elsie did not hesitate for even a second before dropping her basket and rushing to her side. "Stay with me," Elsie said, pressing 2 fingers against Arya's neck to check her pulse. It was weak, but it was there. "Come on now, stay with me. Help? Someone, please. I need help out here." Her calls brought 2 others running from the nearby camp, a small hidden settlement tucked deep within the forest, where the Ashwood clan had made their home after being cast out of their own territory decades earlier. Together, they carried Arya back to the settlement, laying her on a bed of furs inside the largest tent, while Elsie worked quickly to warm her and ease the labor that had clearly already begun. Hours passed in a blur of pain and fear for Arya, drifting in and out of consciousness, as Elsie and another woman, an elder named Nora, worked to bring her children safely into the world. When Arya finally woke fully, the storm outside had passed, and sunlight filtered gently through the fabric of the tent above her. "There you are," Elsie said softly, noticing Arya's eyes open. "You gave us quite a scare, but you and your babies are safe now." "Babies?" Arya whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. "Twins," Nora said, appearing at her side with a warm smile. "A boy and a girl, both strong and healthy, despite everything you've clearly been through." Elsie placed the 2 small bundles gently into Arya's arms, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Arya felt something other than grief and fear. She looked down at her son and daughter, their tiny faces peaceful in sleep, and felt a fierce, overwhelming love settle into the empty space where her heart had been broken. "Kai," she whispered, touching her son's soft cheek. "And Elena." She looked up at the 2 women who had saved her life. "Thank you. I don't know how I can ever repay you." "You don't owe us anything," Elsie said, sitting down beside the bed. "But I would like to know how you ended up alone in that forest, so close to your time, with nothing but a thin cloak and a few coins to your name." Arya hesitated. She did not know these people, did not know if she could trust them with the truth of who she really was. If word reached the Crimson Moon Kingdom that the banished Luna had survived, that she had given birth to the Alpha King's children, there was no telling what might happen. Malric would not rest until he was certain she posed no threat to whatever plans he had set in motion. "My name is Arya," she said carefully, choosing her words with care. "I was cast out from my pack under false accusations. My mate believed lies about me, and I was sent away with nothing. I did not know where else to go. It was not the whole truth, but it was not entirely a lie either, and for now, it seemed to satisfy the 2 women. "Well, you are safe here," Nora said, patting her hand gently. "The Ashwood clan does not turn away those in need. We know better than most what it feels like to be cast aside by those who should have protected us." Over the following weeks, Arya slowly regained her strength. learning more about the clan that had taken her in. The Ashwood clan, she discovered, had once been part of a much larger pack before a bitter conflict decades earlier had led to their exile. Since then, they had lived hidden away from the rest of the wolf world, surviving through hunting, farming, and a quiet, careful kind of magic that ran through their bloodline, a magic tied to healing and to the earth itself. Elsie, she learned, was the clan's most skilled healer, having inherited her gift from her mother before her. She took a particular interest in Arya and her twins, often stopping by simply to check on them, though Arya suspected it was more out of genuine care than duty. "You have a gift too," Elsie observed one afternoon, watching as Arya instinctively soothed Elena's crying, with nothing more than a gentle touch and a low, calming hum. "I can feel it. There is something different about you, Arya, something powerful." Arya's heart skipped, fear rising in her chest. Had she been discovered already? "I don't know what you mean," she said carefully. Elsie studied her for a long moment before shaking her head. "Whatever secrets you carry, they are your own to keep. I only meant that your children are fortunate to have a mother with such strength in her. That is all." Arya relaxed slightly, though the encounter left her thinking carefully about how much longer she could keep her true identity hidden, especially as her children grew, and their own abilities began to show signs of something far beyond ordinary. As the weeks turned into months, Arya began to find her place within the Ashwood clan. She helped where she could, tending gardens, assisting Elsie with the sick and injured, and slowly earning the trust and respect of those around her. The clan leader, an aging but sharp-minded wolf named Edwin, eventually approached her with an offer. In the months leading up to that conversation, Arya had slowly woven herself into the daily rhythms of the Ashwood settlement. She learned to till the rocky soil alongside the other women, discovering an unexpected satisfaction in watching vegetables grow from seeds she had planted with her own hands. She learned the names of every family living within the hidden camp, learned which children were shy and which were bold, learned which elders told the best stories around the evening fire. She also learned, slowly and carefully, about the painful history that had led the Ashwood clan to this isolated existence. Decades earlier, their ancestors had been accused of harboring forbidden magic, a claim that turned out to be only partially true, and had been driven from their ancestral lands by a coalition of frightened, more powerful packs. Since then, they had lived quietly, avoiding conflict, protecting their unusual gifts, and welcoming only the most trustworthy outsiders into their carefully guarded community. Arya found comfort in their story. A strange kinship formed between a woman wrongfully cast out and a people who had suffered a similar fate generations earlier. She began to understand why Edwin valued discretion so highly, why Elsie approached every new arrival with such careful, measured curiosity. Trust, within these walls, was earned slowly, through actions rather than words, and Arya had spent every day since her arrival, proving herself worthy of the shelter they had given her. "You have proven yourself capable and kind since you arrived," Edwin said, sitting across from her one evening by the fire. "The clan could use someone like you, someone with clear strength and a good heart. Would you consider staying with us permanently, becoming one of us?" Arya looked down at her twins, sleeping peacefully in the small basket beside her, and thought of the kingdom she had left behind, the man who had chosen lies over her, the life that no longer existed for her. "I would like that very much," she said finally. "Thank you, Edwin. Thank you for everything." That night, as she lay awake staring up at the stars, visible through a small gap in her tent, Arya allowed herself to think, for the first time since her banishment, about what her future might actually look like. She thought of the promise she had made to herself in the storm, the vow to one day expose the truth and clear her name. But looking at her sleeping children, she realized her priorities had shifted. It was no longer only about revenge, or about proving her innocence to a kingdom that had so easily condemned her. It was about protecting Kai and Elena, about giving them a safe, happy life, far from the danger and cruelty of the world that had rejected their mother. Whatever powers they might inherit, whatever destiny might be waiting for them, she would do everything in her strength to make sure they grew up knowing love instead of the betrayal she had known. She pressed a soft kiss to each of their foreheads and whispered a promise into the quiet night air. "I will keep you safe," she said, "no matter what it takes, no matter who comes looking. I will keep you both safe." Outside the tent, the forest rustled gently in the night breeze, indifferent to the promises being made within. unaware of the storm that was still gathering far away in the halls of the Crimson Moon Kingdom, where a guilty conscience was beginning to stir in the heart of the man who had sent her away. For now, though, Arya allowed herself a moment of peace. She had survived the worst night of her life. She had brought 2 remarkable children into the world, and she had found, against all odds, a new home among people who asked for nothing but honesty and hard work in return for their kindness. It was not the life she had imagined for herself, but as she drifted off to sleep with her children close beside her, she found that it was enough. A sharp cry rang out across the training field, followed immediately by a burst of golden light that sent 3 grown wolves tumbling backward through the dirt. Arya dropped the basket of herbs she had been carrying and sprinted toward the commotion, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Kai! Elena!" she called, pushing through the small crowd that had gathered. Her son stood in the center of the field, breathing hard, his hands still glowing faintly with the same golden light that had knocked down his training partners. Beside him, Elena stood with her arms crossed, clearly unimpressed by her brother's display. "He did it again," Elena said, rolling her eyes, showing off in front of everyone. "I wasn't showing off," Kai protested, though the light around his hands had not yet faded. "Rowan attacked first. I just defended myself." 5 years had passed since Arya first arrived in the Ashwood clan's hidden settlement, and in that time, her twins had grown from helpless infants into 2 remarkable children whose abilities had begun to draw attention throughout the camp. Arya helped the fallen trainees to their feet, offering quiet apologies as she did, before turning her attention to her son. "Kai," she said firmly, "we have talked about this. You cannot use your gift so openly, especially not during training exercises where others could get hurt." "I'm sorry, Mother," Kai said, his golden light finally fading as his shoulders slumped. "It just happens sometimes. I don't always mean for it to." Arya softened, kneeling down to look her son in the eyes. At 5 years old, Kai already stood taller than most children his age, his features carrying the unmistakable stamp of his father's bloodline, though Arya had never told him or his sister the truth about who their father was. "I know it's hard to control," she said gently. "We will keep working on it together, but you must be more careful. Not everyone will understand what you can do, and some people might fear it." Later that evening, after the twins had been settled for the night, Elsie found Arya sitting alone by the edge of the settlement, staring out into the darkening forest. "They grow more powerful every day," Elsie said, settling down beside her old friend. "I have never seen abilities like theirs in all my years among the Ashwood clan, and we have always been known for our unusual gifts." "I know," Arya said quietly. "It frightens me sometimes, how strong they already are. I worry about what will happen as they continue to grow." Elsie studied her carefully, the way she had done many times over the past 5 years, always seeming to sense that there was more to Arya's story than she had ever revealed. "You still haven't told me everything, have you? About where you came from? About who their father truly is?" Arya hesitated. She trusted Elsie completely by now, trusted her with her life and the lives of her children, but the truth still felt dangerous to speak aloud, even in the safety of their hidden home. "It's better if certain things remain buried," she said finally, "for their safety, and for the safety of this entire clan." Elsie nodded slowly, respecting the boundary, even as curiosity clearly lingered behind her eyes. "Whatever burden you carry, Arya, know that you do not carry it alone. This clan has become your family, and family protects one another, no matter what secrets we keep." Before those challenges arrived, Arya had spent countless quiet mornings simply watching her children grow, treasuring small, ordinary moments that felt anything but ordinary, given everything she had survived to reach this point. She watched Kai learn to climb the tallest tree at the edge of camp, his laughter echoing through the branches as Elena called up encouragement from below, always the more cautious of the two despite her fierce protectiveness over her brother. She watched them both learn to read using worn, borrowed books passed down through generations of the Ashwood clan, watched Elena's quick mind absorb new concepts almost instantly, while Kai preferred to learn through patient repetition, determined to master each lesson fully before moving forward. Their personalities, so different from one another despite being twins, fascinated Arya endlessly, each child reflecting different aspects of both herself and the father they had never known. Rowan, one of the other children close to their age, had become their closest friend within the settlement, often joining them for lessons and games, despite the occasional tension caused by Kai's unpredictable bursts of energy. It was during one such game, a friendly wrestling match meant purely in fun, that Kai's abilities had first flared dangerously out of control, prompting the very training session incident that had brought Arya running across the field in fear just days earlier. The days that followed brought new challenges as Kai and Elena continued to develop their extraordinary abilities. Elena, it turned out, possessed a gift for sensing danger long before it arrived, an instinct so sharp that she had twice warned the clan of approaching storms hours before any natural signs appeared. Kai's strength manifested more physically, his control over light and energy growing steadily despite his young age, sometimes flaring unexpectedly when his emotions ran high. Arya worked tirelessly alongside Elsie and Edwin to help her children understand and control their gifts, spending countless hours in quiet clearings, deep within the forest, where accidents would cause no harm to others. She taught them patience, taught them restraint, and most importantly, taught them the value of keeping their remarkable abilities hidden from anyone outside their small, trusted circle. "Why can't we show anyone else what we can do?" Elena asked one afternoon, frustration clear in her young voice after a particularly difficult training session. "The other children in the clan think we're strange, because we always have to hide." Arya pulled her daughter into a gentle embrace, choosing her words carefully. "It's not that you're strange, my love. It's that your gifts are special, rarer than anything most people have ever seen. Some people fear what they don't understand, and fear can make people do unkind things. Until you both have full control over your abilities, and until we better understand exactly what you are capable of, we must be careful about who knows the truth." "Is it because of our father?" Kai asked suddenly, his golden eyes, so much like Damien's, though he had never known it, looking up at his mother with unexpected seriousness. "You never talk about him. Is he the reason we have to hide?" Arya's breath caught in her throat. She had always known this question would come eventually, but she had hoped to have more time to prepare her answer. "Your father," she said slowly, "made a very serious mistake once. A mistake that hurt me deeply, and forced us to leave the place we used to call home. I am not ready to tell you everything about him yet, but I promise, when the time is right, you will know the whole truth." Kai seemed to accept this answer, though Elena's sharp instincts told her there was far more to the story than her mother was letting on. Neither child pressed further that evening, but Arya could see the questions lingering behind their eyes, questions that would only grow more insistent as they continued to grow older, and their powers continued to develop. That night, long after the twins had fallen asleep, Arya found herself once again standing at the edge of the settlement, staring out toward the distant mountains that separated the Ashwood territory from the Crimson Moon Kingdom. She wondered, as she often did, what had become of the kingdom she once called home. She wondered if Damien ever thought of her, ever regretted the choice he had made that stormy night 5 years earlier. She wondered too about Lord Malric, and whether his schemes had continued unchecked in the years since her banishment. Something told her, deep in her instincts, that the peace she had found within the Ashwood clan would not last forever. Her children's powers were growing too strong to remain hidden indefinitely, and sooner or later, the world beyond these forests would come looking for answers. For now, though, she pushed those worries aside and returned to her tent, where her son and daughter slept peacefully, unaware of the storm that fate was still preparing to bring into their lives. She would face that storm when it arrived. Until then, she would continue to give them the only thing she could offer, a childhood filled with love, safety, and the quiet strength of a mother, determined to protect them at any cost. As she settled down to sleep, a distant howl echoed through the mountains, carried on the night wind from somewhere far beyond the borders of the Ashwood territory. Arya's eyes opened at the sound, some ancient instinct within her recognizing danger even in her exhaustion. She lay still for a long moment, listening, before finally convincing herself it was nothing more than an ordinary wolf's cry. She was wrong. Far beyond the mountains, scouts loyal to a rival pack had just discovered rumors of unusual power emanating from deep within forbidden Ashwood territory. Rumors that would soon set in motion a chain of events neither Arya nor her children could have possibly predicted. The goblet shattered against the stone wall, wine spreading across the floor like a dark wound. Alpha King Damien Cross stood in the center of his private chamber, chest heaving, his golden eyes wild with a fury he could no longer contain. "Explain to me," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "why a guard captain would confess, on his deathbed, that he lied about Arya Blackwood 5 years ago." Before him stood Callum, the same guard who had once shown Arya a small kindness at the kingdom's border. He stood rigid, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression grim. "My king." The man was dying of his wounds from the border skirmish last week. He said he wished to clear his conscience before facing judgment beyond this life. He confessed that he had been paid to claim he carried messages on the Luna's behalf. He said he never actually met with anyone from the Ravenwood pack at all. Damien's hands trembled at his sides. 5 years. 5 years he had lived with the belief that Arya had betrayed him, had convinced himself that his judgment that terrible night had been just and necessary. 5 years he had ruled his kingdom with a hollow heart, pushing away every attempt at another match, unable to forget the woman he had banished and the child she had carried. "Who paid him?" Damien demanded. "Give me a name." Callum hesitated, glancing toward the chamber door as though afraid of being overheard. He did not know the man's face clearly. "My king." It was dark, and the payment was delivered through an intermediary. But he said the intermediary wore the crest of the royal advisor's household. The room seemed to grow colder. Damien had suspected, in the quiet corners of his mind, that he rarely allowed himself to visit, that something had felt wrong about that trial from the very beginning. He had chosen to believe the evidence because it was easier than facing the alternative, easier than admitting that someone close to him, someone he trusted with the affairs of his entire kingdom, might have orchestrated the downfall of the woman he loved. "Lord Malric," Damien said, the name tasting like poison on his tongue. "I cannot say for certain, my king," Callum said carefully, "but the crest matches no other household within these walls." Damien sank into a chair, his earlier fury giving way to something far more painful, a crushing wave of guilt that threatened to bring him to his knees. He thought of Arya's face on the day of her trial, the desperation in her eyes as she begged him to see reason, the way she had placed her hands over her stomach and pleaded with him to think of their unborn child. He had looked into those eyes and chosen to believe lies instead. "Where is she now?" Damien asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do we have any word of what became of her after she was sent beyond our borders?" Callum shook his head slowly. "No word has reached this kingdom in 5 years, my king. Many assumed she did not survive the journey, given the storm that night and her condition at the time." The words struck Damien like a physical blow. He had told himself, in the darkest moments of these past 5 years, that perhaps she had found safety somewhere, that perhaps she and their child were living peacefully far from the cruelty of his court. He had never allowed himself to consider that she might have died alone in that forest, cast out by the very man who had once sworn to protect her with his life. "Find out," Damien said, rising from his chair with sudden fierce determination. "I do not care what it costs, or how long it takes. I want to know if Arya Blackwood is still alive, and I want proof, real proof, of what truly happened 5 years ago. Discreetly, Callum. I do not want Lord Malric to know we suspect anything, until I have all the answers I need." "It will be done, my king," Callum said, bowing, before quietly slipping from the chamber. Alone once more, Damien moved to the window overlooking his kingdom, the same window he had stood before countless nights over the past 5 years, wondering what had become of the family he had thrown away in a single, terrible moment of misplaced trust. The kingdom below looked peaceful in the moonlight, its people unaware of the storm quietly brewing within their own castle walls. He thought of Lord Malric, a man who had served as his father's advisor before serving him, a man he had trusted implicitly since childhood. What reason could Malric possibly have for wanting Arya removed? What had he gained from her banishment that could justify such a devastating betrayal? The answer, when it finally came to him, filled Damien with a cold, creeping dread. Malric had a daughter, a young woman named Freya, whom he had long hoped to see married into royalty. With Arya gone and Damien left without a Luna, the path had been cleared for exactly such a match Damien had resisted for years, unable to shake the persistent feeling that something about the arrangement felt deeply wrong, though he had never understood exactly why until this moment. It was never about the kingdom's safety at all, Damien murmured to himself, the pieces finally falling into place. It was about power, about position, and I let him destroy everything, because I was too blind to see the truth. In the days immediately following Callum's revelation, Damien found himself re-examining every memory of the 5 years since Arya's banishment, with newly suspicious eyes. He remembered how quickly Lord Malric had suggested candidates for a new Luna, how persistently he had pushed Damien toward considering Freya, despite the king's obvious lack of interest. He remembered small moments of unease he had dismissed at the time, comments Malric made that seemed slightly too convenient, advice that always somehow benefited the advisor's own family above all others. He remembered, too, the isolation that had crept over his reign in the years since Arya's departure, how Malric had gradually positioned himself as the primary voice Damien trusted on nearly every matter of importance, slowly easing out other advisors who might have offered different perspectives or asked inconvenient questions. It was, Damien realized with growing horror, a masterclass in patient manipulation, executed over years rather than months, designed to be nearly invisible to anyone not looking directly for it. He began keeping a private journal of these realizations, recording dates and details he intended to verify once he had gathered enough evidence to move against Malric without triggering premature suspicion. He knew that acting too quickly, without sufficient proof, would only allow his cunning advisor the opportunity to cover his tracks completely, perhaps even turning the council against Damien himself, by suggesting the grieving king had finally lost his grip on reason. Over the following weeks, Damien moved carefully, gathering information through trusted allies while maintaining the appearance of normal court life. He reviewed the original trial documents in private, finding, upon closer examination, inconsistencies he had somehow overlooked 5 years earlier in his grief and anger. Signatures that did not quite match known samples of Arya's handwriting. Witnesses who had conveniently disappeared from the kingdom shortly after providing their testimony. A pattern of carefully constructed lies, designed to appear seamless to a king, too consumed by betrayal to look closely enough. Callum returned 3 weeks later, with news that sent Damien's heart racing, with a mixture of hope and fear. "My king," he said, entering the private chamber with unusual urgency. "We have found something." Rumors from traders passing through the southern territories speak of a hidden clan living deep within contested forest lands. A clan that took in an injured, pregnant woman 5 years ago during a terrible storm. Damien rose so quickly his chair toppled backward. "Is it her? Is it Arya?" "We cannot be certain, my king," Callum admitted. The traders knew little beyond rumors and second-hand accounts, but the timing matches perfectly with her banishment. Hope, fragile and desperate, took root in Damien's chest for the first time in 5 long years. If Arya had survived, if she and their child, or children, considering the strength of the rumors suggesting twins, were truly alive somewhere within those contested lands, then perhaps there was still a chance to make things right, to undo the damage his blind trust had caused. "Prepare a small envoy," Damien said, his mind already racing with plans. "Quiet, discreet, no royal banners or obvious markings. I want to investigate these rumors myself, before Malric or anyone else in this court becomes aware of what we have discovered. And if we find her, my king," Callum asked, "what then?" Damien was quiet for a long moment, staring out at his kingdom once more, thinking of everything he had lost, everything he hoped desperately to reclaim. "Then I will beg for forgiveness I likely do not deserve," he said finally, "and I will spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of a second chance, however impossible that may seem." Unknown to either of them, deep within his private study, Lord Malric had already begun to notice subtle changes in the king's behavior. The late nights spent poring over old documents, the quiet questions asked of trusted guards, the sudden interest in southern trade routes that had previously held no significance for the crown. A man who had spent decades manipulating the halls of power did not survive by missing such small but telling signs. Malric smiled thinly to himself as he considered the possibilities, already calculating how best to protect the carefully constructed lies that had secured his family's position within the kingdom for the past 5 years. Whatever Damien suspected, whatever truths he hoped to uncover, Malric had no intention of allowing his years of careful planning to unravel now. The stage was quietly being set for a confrontation neither the wounded king nor his scheming advisor could yet fully anticipate, one that would eventually pull every thread of this tangled web into the open, exposing secrets that had remained hidden for far too long. The forest exploded into chaos as strange wolves poured through the northern tree line, their eyes wild with hunger, and their intentions clear. Arya was already moving before the alarm bells finished ringing, shouting orders as she ran toward the edge of the Ashwood settlement, where the attack had begun. "Get the children to the shelter caves," she called to the nearby villagers, who scattered immediately to gather their families. "Elsie, take Kai and Elena with you." "Not without you," Elsie shouted back, already herding a group of frightened children toward the safety of the hidden caves beneath the settlement. But Kai and Elena had other plans. As 3 of the invading wolves broke through the outer defense line, charging toward a group of unprotected elders, Kai's hands began to glow with the same golden light that had become impossible to fully control, especially in moments of genuine danger. "Kai, no," Arya shouted, but it was too late. A burst of energy erupted from her son's outstretched hands, striking the lead attacker with enough force to send him tumbling backward into the underbrush. The other 2 invaders froze, staring in shock at the young boy who had just displayed power far beyond anything a child his age should possess. "What is that thing?" one of them snarled, backing away in confusion and fear. Elena, meanwhile, had grabbed the arm of an elderly woman who had stumbled, her sharp instincts screaming warnings even as chaos erupted around them. "This way," Elena said urgently, pulling the woman toward safety while somehow, impossibly, seeming to sense exactly where the next attack would come from before it happened. Arya reached her children moments later, her own considerable strength, honed over years of training with the Ashwood warriors, finally coming into full display as she intercepted an attacker, heading straight for Kai. She moved with practiced precision, disarming the invader and forcing him back without causing lasting harm. Her priority focused entirely on protecting her children, rather than seeking unnecessary conflict.
"Behind you!" Elena shouted suddenly, and Arya spun just in time to block another attack, her daughter's warning giving her the crucial half-second she needed to react.
The battle raged for nearly 20 minutes before the invading wolves, clearly overwhelmed by the unexpected strength of the Ashwood defenders, particularly the strange and powerful abilities displayed by Arya's children, finally retreated back into the northern forest, dragging their wounded companions with them. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, the settlement moved with practiced efficiency, born from decades of quietly preparing for exactly this kind of danger. Elsie moved from wounded villager to wounded villager, her healing gift working quickly to close the more serious injuries, while less urgent cases were bandaged by her assistants and left to rest. Arya helped where she could, carrying water and offering comfort to frightened children whose parents were busy assisting with recovery efforts elsewhere in the camp. Kai, still shaken by his own display of power, sat quietly at the edge of the settlement, staring at his own hands, as though they belonged to someone else entirely. Elena found him there, settling down beside her brother without a word, understanding instinctively that he needed quiet companionship more than any attempt at conversation. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," Kai finally said. "It just happened. I saw them coming for the elders, and something inside me just reacted." "You protected people," Elena said simply. "That is not something to feel guilty about, Kai. You saved lives today." Her words seemed to ease some of the tension in her brother's shoulders, though the weight of what had happened, and what it meant for their carefully hidden existence, clearly still troubled him deeply. Neither child could fully grasp yet how significantly this single afternoon would reshape the course of their entire lives. As the chaos settled and the settlement began the slow process of recovery, Edwin approached Arya with a grave expression on his weathered face. "We need to talk," he said quietly, "about what happened here today, and what it means for all of us." They gathered that evening in Edwin's tent, along with Elsie and several senior members of the clan, to discuss the implications of the attack, and more importantly, the abilities that Kai and Elena had displayed so openly in front of dozens of witnesses. "Word will spread," Edwin said grimly. "Those wolves who attacked us today will return to their pack, and they will speak of what they witnessed. Children with power like that do not go unnoticed for long, especially not in a world where such abilities are exceedingly rare." "I know," Arya said, her voice heavy with worry, as she glanced toward the tent flap where her children waited outside with Elsie's assistant. "I have tried for years to keep them hidden, to teach them control, but I always knew this day might come." "Perhaps it is time," Elsie said gently, "to tell them the whole truth about who they are, and where they truly come from. They are old enough now to understand, and they deserve to know what they might be facing." Arya closed her eyes, feeling the weight of a decision she had postponed for far too long finally pressing down upon her. She had wanted to protect her children from the pain of their complicated history for as long as possible, but circumstances were rapidly making that protection impossible to maintain. Later that night, after the settlement had finally quieted and most of the clan had retired to rest and recover from the day's chaos, Arya sat with Kai and Elena inside their tent, preparing herself for a conversation she had dreaded for 5 long years. "There is something I need to tell you both," she began, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for theirs. "Something about who your father is, and why we had to leave our old home." Kai and Elena listened in silence as their mother finally told them the truth, about the kingdom she had once ruled as Luna, about the false accusations that had led to her banishment, about the powerful bloodline they had inherited from a father who believed they did not even exist. She spoke carefully, choosing her words to avoid painting Damien as purely a villain, despite everything he had cost her, understanding that someday her children might need to form their own judgments about the man who had sired them. "Our father is a king?" Elena asked, her young voice filled with a complicated mixture of wonder and confusion. "And he banished you because he believed you had betrayed him?" "Yes," Arya said softly. "Someone close to him manipulated the truth, convinced him of lies that led to my exile. Your father chose to believe those lies over trusting me, and that choice cost us everything we once had." Kai remained quiet for a long moment, processing this new information with the same intensity he brought to everything else in his young life. "Is that why I have this power?" he finally asked, looking down at his own hands. "Because of him? Because of his bloodline?" "Yes," Arya confirmed. "Your abilities come from an ancient royal lineage, one that has not manifested with such strength in generations. That is part of why we have had to be so careful about keeping your gifts hidden. People who might recognize the source of such power could pose a serious danger to both of you." "Will he ever know about us?" Elena asked quietly. "Our father? Will he ever find out that we exist?" Arya hesitated, uncertain of how to answer a question she had asked herself countless times over the years. "I do not know, my love," she said honestly. "Perhaps someday. But for now, our priority must remain your safety, and the safety of everyone in this clan who has shown us such kindness." The twins absorbed this information with the quiet maturity that had always set them apart from other children their age, though Arya could see the questions still lingering behind their eyes. Questions about identity, about belonging, about a father neither of them had ever known, but whose blood ran undeniably through their veins. As she finally tucked her children into bed that night, watching them drift into an exhausted sleep after the chaos of the day's events, Arya found herself once again staring out toward the distant mountains, wondering how much longer the peace of their hidden life could possibly last. Somewhere beyond those mountains, unknown to her, a small, discreet envoy, led personally by Alpha King Damien Cross, was already making its way south, following rumors that grew stronger with every passing mile, rumors of a hidden clan and a woman who had somehow survived against impossible odds. The threads of fate, long tangled and obscured by years of secrets and lies, were finally beginning to pull tight, drawing every player in this complicated story toward a confrontation that none of them could avoid much longer. Rain hammered against the canopy of trees as Damien pulled his hood tighter around his face, doing his best to blend in among the small group of traders he had joined near the southern border crossing. 5 days had passed since he left the Crimson Moon Kingdom under the guise of a diplomatic mission to neighboring territories, leaving Callum in charge of maintaining appearances, while he pursued the truth that had consumed his every waking thought. "You're awfully quiet for a merchant," observed Owen, the leader of the small trading caravan Damien had paid handsomely to accompany, without asking too many questions. "Something troubling you, friend?" "Just tired from the road," Damien replied, keeping his voice carefully neutral, unwilling to reveal his true identity to anyone outside his most trusted circle. The journey south had already tested Damien in ways he had not anticipated when he first set out from the castle. He had grown accustomed, over years of rule, to comfort and deference, to warm meals prepared by skilled cooks and soft beds, turned down each evening by attentive staff. Traveling as an anonymous merchant meant sleeping on hard ground, eating whatever simple provisions the caravan carried, and enduring the casual indifference of strangers who had no idea they walked beside a king. Strangely, he found a certain clarity in the discomfort, a stripping away of the layers of ceremony and formality, that had insulated him from the consequences of his own choices for so many years. Out here, beneath open sky, and among ordinary travelers concerned only with reaching their next destination safely, he was forced to confront his guilt directly, without the distractions of court business or the comforting rituals of royal life. He thought often of the letters he had never sent, the search parties he had never properly authorized, the years he had spent telling himself that respecting the terms of Arya's banishment was somehow the honorable choice, when in truth, it had simply been easier than confronting the possibility that he had made a catastrophic mistake. Every mile traveled south felt like a small penance, inadequate but necessary, for the years of silence that had followed her exile. Owen shrugged, clearly accustomed to travelers who preferred to keep their business private, and returned his attention to guiding the caravan along the muddy forest path. Damien used the opportunity to study the surrounding landscape, searching for any sign that might confirm the rumors that had brought him this far from his kingdom. They had heard whispers in nearly every village they passed through, stories of a hidden clan living deep within the contested forest territories to the south, a group that had supposedly repelled an attack from a rival pack just days earlier, using powers unlike anything the local wolves had ever witnessed. Some stories spoke of children with control over light itself. Others whispered of a woman with unnatural strength and instincts sharper than any ordinary shifter. Damien's heart had nearly stopped the first time he heard the rumors clearly enough to understand their implications. Children, plural. If these stories held any truth at all, then Arya had not only survived her banishment, she had given birth to twins, children who now carried powers strong enough to become the subject of legend among the local villages. "We should reach the northern edge of the contested territories by tomorrow evening," Owen announced that night as they made camp beside a small stream. "Though I'll warn you, friend, whatever business draws you into those forests, you'd best tread carefully. The clans hidden in those woods do not take kindly to strangers, especially not after whatever happened during that recent attack." "I appreciate the warning," Damien said, staring into the flames of their small campfire long after the others had settled into sleep, his mind consumed with a mixture of desperate hope and gnawing fear. What would he say to her, if the rumors proved true? What words could possibly begin to make amends for 5 years of exile, 5 years of raising their children alone in hiding, 5 years of pain caused by his own blind trust in a man who had betrayed them both? He had rehearsed apologies countless times during the long journey south, but every version felt hopelessly inadequate against the magnitude of what he had done. The following afternoon, as the small caravan pressed deeper into unfamiliar forest territory, Damien's keen senses picked up something the ordinary traders around him would never have noticed: the faint but unmistakable scent of wolves, marking hidden boundaries, subtle signs of a settlement designed to remain invisible to unwelcome visitors. "This is where I leave you," Damien told Owen quietly, pressing a generous payment into the trader's hand. "Thank you for your discretion." Owen studied him for a long moment, clearly curious, but wise enough not to ask further questions. "Whatever you're searching for out here, friend, I hope you find it. Something tells me it matters a great deal to you." "More than you could possibly know," Damien replied, before slipping away from the caravan and disappearing into the dense underbrush. He moved carefully through the forest, using every hunting skill he had developed over decades as an alpha to avoid detection, while searching for any sign of the hidden settlement the rumors had described. Hours passed as he tracked subtle clues through the wilderness: broken branches, faint scent trails, careful arrangements of stones that seemed designed to guide clan members while remaining invisible to outsiders. As dusk began to settle over the forest, Damien finally caught sight of movement through the trees ahead. Wolves moving with the disciplined precision of trained warriors, patrolling what was clearly the outer boundary of a well-established settlement. He crouched low behind a fallen log, watching carefully, his heart pounding with anticipation as he tried to catch any glimpse that might confirm what he had traveled so far to discover. Then he heard it, a voice calling out from somewhere within the settlement, a voice achingly, impossibly familiar, despite 5 long years of separation. "Kai, Elena, dinner is ready. Come inside, before it gets any colder." Damien's breath caught in his throat. It was her. After everything, after 5 years of uncertainty and grief and desperate hope, Arya was alive, and from the sound of those 2 names called into the evening air, so were their children. He remained hidden as darkness fell, watching from a careful distance as the settlement settled into its evening routine. catching brief glimpses of movement through the trees that gave him no clear view of Arya herself, though the sound of her voice, unchanged despite everything she had endured, was more than enough to confirm the truth he had traveled so far to uncover. He knew he could not simply walk into the settlement uninvited, not without risking a confrontation that could put Arya and their children in danger, especially if word of his royal identity somehow reached the wrong ears before he had a chance to properly explain his intentions. He needed a plan, a way to approach carefully, respectfully, giving Arya every opportunity to refuse him if that was truly what she wanted after everything he had done. As he settled into an uncomfortable but necessary vigil at the edge of the forest, preparing to wait for the right moment to make his presence known, Damien allowed himself, for the first time in 5 years, to feel something resembling hope. He did not yet know that his presence near the settlement had not gone entirely unnoticed. Elena, whose remarkable instincts had only grown sharper with every passing month, had felt something unusual stirring at the edge of her awareness, that very evening, a presence she could not quite identify, but that left her feeling unsettled long after she had gone to bed. "Something is out there," she whispered to her brother later that night, both of them lying awake in their shared sleeping space within the family tent. "Something important. I can feel it." "Another attack?" Kai asked, immediately alert despite the late hour. "No," Elena said slowly, trying to make sense of the strange, complicated feeling that had settled over her senses. "This feels different. Not dangerous exactly, but important, like something is about to change." Neither child could have possibly guessed just how right Elena's instincts truly were, nor could they have imagined that the change she sensed approaching would arrive not as an enemy, but as the father they had only recently learned existed, standing now at the very edge of their hidden world, working up the courage to finally face the family he had so carelessly cast aside. Alpha Silas Grey stood at the head of nearly 50 warriors, his eyes gleaming with ambition as he studied the maps his scouts had prepared showing the approximate location of the hidden Ashwood settlement. For years, his pack had struggled at the edges of relevance among the wolf territories, overshadowed by larger, more powerful packs, and denied any real influence in the affairs of the greater kingdoms. That was about to change. "You are certain of what your scouts witnessed?" Silas asked, turning to the warrior who had led the failed scavenger attack weeks earlier, the same man who had barely escaped with his life, after encountering a child capable of channeling raw energy through his bare hands. "Absolutely certain, Alpha," the warrior confirmed. "I have never seen anything like it. If we could capture that boy, bring him under our control, imagine what such power could mean for our packs standing among the other territories." His pack had once held modest but respectable standing among the smaller territories bordering the contested southern forests, but a series of poor harvests and a costly conflict with a neighboring pack years earlier had left them weakened, their influence steadily diminishing, while stronger packs like the Crimson Moon Kingdom expanded their reach unchallenged. Silas had watched with growing bitterness as his warnings to nearby alliances went ignored, as trade agreements favored larger, more established territories, as his own name carried less and less weight in matters of regional importance. The rumors of a child capable of channeling raw power through his bare hands had reached him almost by accident, relayed through a nervous trader who had heard whispers from villagers near the contested forest border. At first, Silas had dismissed the stories as exaggeration, the kind of tale that grew larger with every retelling. But when his own scouts returned from their scavenger raid with confirmed accounts of the boy's abilities, accounts that matched perfectly despite being gathered independently, Silas allowed himself to hope that fortune had finally handed his struggling pack an opportunity too significant to ignore. Silas smiled thinly, already envisioning the possibilities. A weapon like that, properly controlled and trained, could shift the balance of power dramatically in his favor. He cared little for the child's welfare or the mother's protection. He saw only opportunity, only the chance to finally claim the respect and influence his pack had been denied for far too long. "Prepare the warriors," Silas commanded. "We attack at dawn, with full force this time. No half measures. I want that boy brought to me alive, and anyone who stands in our way dealt with accordingly." Word of the impending attack reached the Ashwood settlement just hours before dawn, carried by a nervous young scout who had overheard fragments of Silas's plans while trading at a neutral border village. Edwin gathered the clan's senior members immediately, calling for an emergency council even as the first hints of gray light began to touch the eastern horizon. 50 warriors, Edwin said grimly, relaying the scout's report. Perhaps more. This is no simple raid. Alpha Silas intends a full assault, and from what our scout overheard, he means to capture Kai specifically. Arya felt her blood run cold at those words. She had feared this moment for years, the possibility that her children's powers would eventually attract exactly this kind of dangerous attention. But hearing it, confirmed so directly, sent a wave of fierce, protective fury coursing through her entire body. "He will not have my son," she said, her voice steady despite the fear churning beneath the surface. "Whatever it takes, Silas Grey will not lay a single hand on either of my children." "We do not have the numbers to withstand a full assault of that size," Edwin admitted reluctantly. "Our warriors are skilled, but 50 trained fighters against our defenses would prove extremely costly, even if we managed to hold our ground." Arya closed her eyes, understanding what needed to be done, understanding that the time for hiding her true strength she had carefully concealed even from her closest friends within the clan, had finally come to an end. "I can help even the odds," she said quietly, "but you all deserve to know the truth about who I really am, before I do." In the tense minutes that followed, Arya finally revealed what she had kept hidden for 5 long years, that she had once served as Luna of the Crimson Moon Kingdom, trained extensively in combat and leadership before her banishment, and that her own abilities, inherited from a bloodline nearly as significant as the one carried by her children, remained far stronger than anyone in the settlement had ever witnessed. "I should have told you all sooner," she said, watching the shock ripple across the faces of Edwin, Elsie, and the other senior clan members, gathered in the dim morning light. "But I feared what such knowledge might mean for my family's safety. Now, that same knowledge might be exactly what saves this entire settlement." Edwin studied her for a long, tense moment before nodding slowly. "Whatever you can offer, Arya, we will gladly accept. Right now, our priority must be protecting everyone in this settlement, including your children." As dawn broke fully over the forest, Silas Grey's warriors emerged from the tree line in organized formation, far more disciplined and dangerous than the scattered attack the settlement had faced weeks earlier. Arya stood at the front of the Ashwood defenders, her twins safely hidden away with Elsie despite their protests, determined to face this threat head-on, rather than hide from the destiny that had clearly been building toward this moment for years. "Send out the mother," Silas called from among his warriors, his sharp eyes immediately picking Arya out as the clear leader of the settlement's defense. "Bring me the boy, and no further harm needs to come to any of you." "You will not touch my children," Arya called back, her voice carrying clearly across the tense space between the two opposing groups. "Turn back now, Silas Grey, while you still have the chance to leave this forest with your warriors intact." Silas laughed, a cold, dismissive sound, bold words from a woman about to lose everything she claims to protect. He raised his hand, signaling his warriors forward. "Take them." What followed was unlike anything the Ashwood settlement had ever witnessed. Arya moved through Silas's warriors with a controlled, devastating efficiency that spoke clearly of years of formal training as a former Luna, disarming attackers and neutralizing threats with precise, measured strength, rather than reckless aggression. She fought not to cause lasting harm, but to protect, her every movement calculated to end each confrontation as quickly and safely as possible. The Ashwood warriors, inspired by their leader's unexpected display of strength, fought with renewed determination alongside her, holding their ground against Silas's forces, despite being significantly outnumbered. Even Edwin, well past his prime fighting years, proved his continued value as a strategist, directing the defense with careful precision that maximized their limited numbers. Silas himself finally moved to confront Arya directly, recognizing her as the true obstacle, standing between his ambitions and the powerful child he sought to capture. "You fight well for an ordinary mother," he sneered, circling her carefully. "I am no ordinary mother," Arya replied, her stance steady and unwavering, "and you have made a grave mistake coming here today." Their confrontation was brief but intense, Arya's superior training and years of quiet discipline proving more than a match for Silas's raw ambition. Within minutes, she had disarmed him completely, leaving him kneeling on the forest floor, as his remaining warriors, witnessing their leader's clear defeat, began to retreat in scattered disorder. This is not over, Silas snarled, even as he was forced to withdraw with his defeated forces. It is over, Arya replied firmly. Return here again, and you will find far less mercy waiting for you. As the last of Silas's warriors disappeared back into the northern forest, the Ashwood settlement erupted into a mixture of relief and stunned amazement at what they had just witnessed. Arya, breathing hard but otherwise unharmed, turned to find Kai and Elena watching from a safe distance, having slipped away from Elsie's protective grip to witness their mother's incredible display of strength. "Mother," Kai said, his young voice filled with awe, "that was amazing." Arya managed a tired smile, pulling both her children into a relieved embrace. "I told you both I would always protect you," she said softly, "no matter what it takes." But even as the settlement began the process of recovery, tending to the wounded and repairing damaged defenses, Arya could not shake the feeling that this confrontation, significant as it had been, was merely a precursor to something even larger approaching on the horizon. She had revealed her true strength today, and word of a former Luna living among the Ashwood clan, capable of such formidable combat skill, would not remain contained within these forests for long. Somewhere at the edge of the settlement, hidden among the trees, a figure who had watched the entire confrontation unfold with growing disbelief and recognition, finally stepped forward, no longer able to remain hidden after witnessing the truth he had traveled so far to confirm. "Arya," Damien called out, his voice breaking, with 5 years of accumulated grief and guilt as he finally revealed himself. "Arya, please, we need to talk." Arya spun around so quickly that Kai and Elena both stumbled backward in surprise. Standing at the edge of the tree line, still dressed in the plain, travel-worn clothes of an ordinary merchant, was a face she had spent 5 years trying desperately to forget. "Damien," she breathed, disbelief and fury warring for dominance in her voice. "What are you doing here?" The entire settlement seemed to hold its breath, warriors still recovering from the recent battle, turning their attention toward this unexpected new arrival, sensing immediately that something significant was unfolding before them. "I had to find you," Damien said, taking a hesitant step forward, his golden eyes fixed entirely on Arya, as though nothing else in the world existed in that moment. "I had to know if the rumors were true, if you had truly survived." "You had no right to come looking for me," Arya said, her voice sharp with 5 years of accumulated pain. "You made your choice very clear, the day you banished me from everything I once called home." "I know," Damien said, his voice cracking with genuine anguish. "I know, and I have spent every single day since then, regretting that choice with everything in me. Arya, I was wrong. I was so terribly wrong, and I did not discover the truth until it was far too late to undo the damage I had already caused." "The truth?" Arya's laugh held no warmth whatsoever. "What truth could possibly justify what you did to me? To our children?" Damien's eyes widened, his gaze moving past Arya to settle on Kai and Elena, who stood watching this exchange with wide, uncertain eyes. "Children," he whispered, the word carrying the weight of 5 years of missed moments. 5 years of a father who had never known his own children existed until this very instant. "There are 2 of them." "Twins," Arya confirmed, her protective instincts flaring as she moved slightly in front of her son and daughter. "A son and a daughter you know absolutely nothing about, because you chose to believe lies over trusting the woman who loved you." "I discovered the truth only recently," Damien said desperately, taking another careful step forward, though he stopped immediately when Arya's stance shifted into something clearly defensive. "Lord Malric fabricated the entire case against you. He paid witnesses to lie. He wanted you removed so his own daughter could take your place as Luna. I was blind, Arya. I let my own hurt pride convince me of lies, rather than trusting in everything we had built together." The revelation hit Arya like a physical blow, confirming suspicions she had carried for 5 long years, without ever having concrete proof. "Malric," she whispered, memories of his satisfied expression during her trial, flooding back with painful clarity. "I tried to tell you. I begged you to question him, and you refused to listen." "I know," Damien said, his voice breaking completely now. "I have no excuse that could possibly make up for what I did to you, to us. I was a fool, blinded by grief and anger and betrayal, that turned out to be entirely fabricated. I do not expect your forgiveness, Arya. I do not even know if I deserve the chance to ask for it, but I needed you to know the truth, and I needed to see with my own eyes that you and our children were safe." Elena, whose sharp instincts had been carefully studying this stranger since his sudden appearance, finally stepped forward despite her mother's protective stance. "You are our father," she said, her young voice steady, despite the enormity of the moment. "Mother told us about you, about what happened." Damien's composure finally crumbled entirely, as he looked upon his daughter for the very first time, seeing in her sharp, intelligent eyes a reflection of the strength and wisdom that had always defined Arya. "Elena," he said softly, testing her name for the first time. "Yes, I am your father, though I know I have done absolutely nothing yet to earn that title in any meaningful way." Kai remained more cautious, watching this stranger with a wariness that mirrored his mother's own guarded posture. "You hurt her," he said simply, his young voice carrying an intensity beyond his years. "You hurt our mother very badly." "Yes," Damien admitted without hesitation, kneeling down to bring himself to eye level with his son, despite the risk such vulnerability posed. "I made the worst mistake of my entire life, Kai. I hurt your mother terribly, and I have spent every day since trying to understand how I could have been so blind to the truth. I cannot undo what I have done, but I am here now, hoping desperately for even the smallest chance to begin making things right." She remembered the early years of their courtship, long before the weight of the crown had settled fully upon his shoulders, when Damien had been simply a young alpha, eager to prove himself worthy of his father's legacy. She remembered the way he used to laugh freely, without the careful guardedness that later crept into every interaction, once the responsibilities of leadership grew heavier. She remembered believing, with the complete certainty of young love, that nothing could ever come between them. That certainty had shattered the night he chose Malric's lies over her truth, and no amount of remorse, however genuine it appeared now, could fully undo the damage of watching the person she trusted most turn away from her in her darkest moment. Yet standing here, watching him kneel before their children with tears in his eyes, she could not deny that something in him had clearly changed as well, whether through 5 years of guilt or through the simple passage of time that forced even kings to reckon with their failures. Arya watched this exchange with a complicated tangle of emotions churning through her chest, 5 years of carefully suppressed grief and anger finally rising to the surface, now that the man responsible for her exile stood directly before her once more. Part of her wanted nothing more than to send him away immediately, to protect the peaceful life she had built for her children, far from the pain and betrayal of the kingdom he still ruled. But another part of her, the part that had once loved him with everything she possessed, could not entirely ignore the raw sincerity in his voice, the genuine anguish clearly visible in his golden eyes, as he finally met his children for the first time. "You cannot simply appear after 5 years," Arya said finally, her voice firm, despite the conflicting emotions warring within her, "and expect forgiveness to follow immediately behind your apology. Whatever guilt you carry, Damien, it does not erase what you did to me, what you cost our children before they were even born." "I know," Damien said quietly. "I do not expect forgiveness, not today, and perhaps not ever, but I am asking, humbly, for the chance to prove that I have changed, that I am not the same blind fool who condemned you without proper cause. I want to make things right, Arya, however long that process might take." Edwin, who had been observing this tense reunion with careful attention, finally stepped forward, addressing the visiting king with the measured authority of a clan leader accustomed to difficult negotiations. "Alpha King Damien," he said formally, "you are currently standing within Ashwood territory, a clan that has offered Arya and her children protection and belonging for the past 5 years. Whatever history exists between you and this woman, we will not allow her or her children to be pressured into any decision they are not ready to make." "I understand completely," Damien said, rising from his kneeling position and addressing Edwin with genuine respect. "I have no intention of forcing anything upon Arya or my children. I only ask for the opportunity to be present, to prove my sincerity over time, however long that process requires." Arya studied him carefully, searching his face for any hint of the deception that had once cost her everything, finding instead only exhausted, genuine remorse that seemed to have aged him considerably beyond his actual years. "You may stay within the settlement's boundaries," she said finally, "under Edwin's supervision, while we determine how to proceed from here. But know this, Damien, earning back what you destroyed will require far more than words alone." "I understand," Damien said, relief and gratitude evident in his exhausted expression. Thank you, Arya. Thank you for this chance, however small it might be. As the tense confrontation finally began to settle into something resembling careful negotiation, none of them yet knew that word of Damien's disappearance from the kingdom had already reached Lord Malric's ears, prompting the scheming advisor to set his own dangerous plans into motion, determined to protect the secrets he had spent 5 years carefully constructing before the truth could unravel everything he had worked so hard to build. Callum burst into the small clearing where Damien had been staying just outside the Ashwood settlement, his horse lathered with sweat from a desperate ride that had clearly pushed both rider and animal to their absolute limits. "My king," he gasped, nearly collapsing from exhaustion. "You must return immediately. Lord Malric has moved against the throne." "Rhaeda." Damien rose instantly, every instinct honed from years of leadership snapping into sharp focus. "What has happened?" "He has convinced the council that you abandoned your duties without explanation," Callum said, struggling to catch his breath. "He claims you have been compromised somehow, perhaps enchanted or manipulated by enemies of the crown. He is petitioning to have himself named regent until your return, or your fitness to rule can be properly assessed." The implications struck Damien immediately. If Malric successfully positioned himself as regent, even temporarily, he would gain access to enormous power within the kingdom, power he could potentially use to solidify his position permanently, especially if he could somehow prevent Damien from returning at all. "How long do we have?" Damien asked, already moving to gather his few belongings. "The council meets in 3 days to vote on the matter," Callum said. "If you do not return before then, my king, I fear Malric may find enough support among the more fearful council members to secure his position." Arya, who had been observing this urgent exchange from a short distance away, felt her own protective instincts stirring, despite her continued uncertainty about Damien's presence in their lives. Whatever anger she still carried toward him, she recognized immediately the danger that Malric's continued influence posed, not only to Damien, but potentially to her children as well, should the truth of their existence and their royal bloodline ever become public knowledge under the wrong circumstances. "I need to return immediately," Damien said, turning back toward Arya, with obvious reluctance at the timing of this sudden crisis. "I know I have no right to ask anything further of you, but Malric must be stopped before he seizes control of the kingdom entirely." Arya considered this for a long moment, weighing the complicated tangle of emotions and practical concerns warring within her. "This affects my children as well," she said finally. "If Malric solidifies his position, and if he ever discovers that Kai and Elena exist, carrying the very bloodline he attempted to eliminate 5 years ago, their safety could be at risk, regardless of how far we hide within these forests." "Then let me help end this properly," Damien said urgently. "Return with me. Expose the truth before the full council. Let the kingdom see exactly what Malric has done, and let justice finally be served after 5 years of lies." Arya looked toward Edwin, who nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation, despite his natural caution regarding the outside world. "If this threat could eventually reach our doorstep regardless," Edwin said, "perhaps it is wiser to address it directly, on your own terms, rather than waiting for danger to find you unprepared." After a tense discussion with Elsie and the twins themselves, both of whom expressed a fierce desire to finally see the kingdom their mother had once called home, Arya made her decision. "We will return," she said, "together. But make no mistake, Damien. I am not returning as your Luna seeking reconciliation. I am returning to ensure justice is finally done, and to protect my children from any lingering danger Malric's schemes might still pose." "That is more than I could have possibly hoped for," Damien said, gratitude evident in his exhausted expression. "Thank you, Arya." The journey back to the Crimson Moon Kingdom took nearly 2 full days of hard travel, during which Arya found herself explaining to Kai and Elena, in more detail than ever before, the full history of the kingdom they now approached, preparing them as best she could for the strange and complicated world of royal politics they were about to encounter for the very first time. They arrived at the kingdom's borders, just hours before the council's scheduled vote, moving quickly through familiar streets that Arya had not walked in 5 long years, drawing startled glances and hushed whispers from villagers who recognized the banished former Luna, returning in the company of their absent king. The great hall, when they finally entered, fell into stunned silence. Lord Malric stood before the assembled council, mid-speech, his confident expression faltering the moment he caught sight of Damien striding through the doors with Arya at his side, flanked by two children whose golden eyes immediately marked them as unmistakably connected to the royal bloodline. "My king," Malric said, quickly recovering his composure, despite the obvious shock evident in his tightened expression. "You have returned, and you have brought guests." "I have brought the truth, Malric," Damien said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. 5 years ago, you fabricated evidence against Arya Blackwood, paying witnesses to lie and destroying an innocent woman's life to clear the path for your own daughter's ambitions within this court. Gasps rippled through the assembled council members as Damien laid out the evidence he had gathered, the deathbed confession of the guard captain, the inconsistencies within the original trial documents, the clear pattern of manipulation that had led directly to Arya's unjust banishment 5 years earlier. "These are baseless accusations," Malric said, though his composure was clearly cracking under the weight of mounting evidence. "I have served this crown faithfully for decades. Why would I ever risk everything for such a scheme?" "Because your daughter wanted to become Luna," Arya said, stepping forward with quiet, controlled fury. "Because removing me cleared the path for exactly that ambition. Tell me, Malric, where is Freya now? Has she been waiting patiently these 5 years for her father's schemes to finally bear fruit?" The color drained from Malric's face as he realized the depth of evidence assembled against him. Around the hall, council members who had once respected his counsel now watched with growing horror and disgust as the true extent of his betrayal became increasingly clear. "Guards," Damien commanded, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority as Alpha King. "Arrest Lord Malric immediately, pending a full and proper trial for his crimes against this crown and against an innocent woman who deserved so much better than the injustice inflicted upon her." As guards moved to restrain the now visibly panicked advisor, Malric made one desperate attempt at defiance, lunging toward a hidden blade concealed within his robes, perhaps hoping to create enough chaos to escape the consequences finally catching up to him after 5 long years of careful manipulation. But Elena, whose remarkable instincts had never failed her, sensed the danger a fraction of a second before it materialized, calling out a sharp warning that gave the guards just enough time to intercept Malric before he could act on his desperate impulse. "Behind him!" Elena shouted, and the guards reacted immediately, restraining Malric fully before he could cause any harm to anyone within the crowded hall. In the days that followed the arrest, additional witnesses came forward, emboldened by Malric's sudden fall from grace. A merchant confessed to delivering coded messages between Malric and the guard captain, who had later provided false testimony against Arya. A former handmaiden revealed that she had been dismissed from her position 5 years earlier, after questioning the sudden disappearance of certain letters from Arya's private chamber, letters that had mysteriously reappeared as evidence during the trial. Piece by piece, the full extent of Malric's careful, patient scheme became clear to a council that had once trusted him without question. Freya, Malric's daughter, was questioned extensively as well, though the council ultimately concluded that she had known little of her father's actual methods, believing only that circumstances had simply favored her potential match with the king, rather than understanding the deliberate manipulation behind those circumstances. She was permitted to remain within the kingdom, stripped of any ambition toward the throne, but spared the harsher punishment reserved for her father, whose trial concluded with a sentence of permanent exile to a remote, heavily guarded island territory, reserved for those who had committed grave crimes against the crown. The former advisor was dragged away in chains, his protests of innocence falling on completely deaf ears, as the assembled council members, witnesses, now to overwhelming evidence of his guilt, began to understand the full scope of the injustice that had been allowed to fester within their kingdom for 5 long years. As the chaos of the arrest finally settled, Damien turned to face Arya and their children, the entire hall watching in stunned silence, as the true weight of this remarkable reunion began to sink in among the gathered nobility. "Arya Blackwood," Damien said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, "on behalf of this entire kingdom, I offer my deepest apology for the grave injustice inflicted upon you 5 years ago. Whatever forgiveness you choose to grant, know that this kingdom owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid." Arya looked around the hall, at the faces of nobles and council members who had once condemned her without question, now watching her with expressions ranging from shame to awe to genuine respect. She thought of everything she had endured over the past 5 years, the pain, the fear, the incredible strength she had discovered within herself and passed on to her remarkable children. "This kingdom does not need my forgiveness," she said finally, her voice steady and strong. "It needs to learn from the mistakes that allowed such injustice to occur in the first place. That process begins today, with the truth finally brought into the light where it belongs." The hall erupted into a mixture of applause and emotional murmurs as the assembled nobility processed the full weight of what had just unfolded before them: the return of a wrongfully banished Luna, the exposure of a scheme that had corrupted their kingdom's justice for half a decade, and the sudden, remarkable revelation of 2 royal children whose extraordinary abilities marked them as perhaps the most significant heirs the Crimson Moon Kingdom had seen in generations. 3 months had passed since Lord Malric's arrest, and the Crimson Moon Kingdom had transformed considerably in that time, working steadily to rebuild trust between the throne and its people after the shocking revelations that had unraveled years of carefully hidden corruption. Malric's trial had concluded swiftly given the overwhelming evidence against him, resulting in his permanent removal from any position of influence within the kingdom, along with the confiscation of the wealth and status his schemes had unjustly secured for his family. Arya stood now at the edge of the Great Hall, watching preparations unfold for a ceremony that would have seemed utterly impossible to imagine just months earlier. Villagers and nobles alike filled the courtyard beyond the hall's tall windows, gathered to witness a moment that had already become the subject of countless whispered conversations throughout the kingdom and beyond. "Are you ready?" Elsie asked, appearing at Arya's side dressed in fine clothing that marked her new status as an honored guest of the crown, a position secured after the Ashwood clan had been formally recognized and welcomed back into alliance with the Crimson Moon Kingdom, following their crucial role in exposing Malric's treachery. "As ready as I will ever be," Arya said, smoothing the elegant fabric of her own gown, so different from the simple, practical clothing she had worn throughout her years in hiding, yet somehow feeling more authentically herself than she had in a very long time. The past 3 months had brought countless changes, not only to the kingdom itself, but to Arya's own complicated relationship with Damien. She had watched him carefully during this time, observing his genuine efforts to prove the sincerity of his remorse, his patient dedication to earning back even a fraction of the trust he had so carelessly destroyed 5 years earlier. He had never once pressured her toward reconciliation, respecting the careful boundaries she had established, allowing their relationship to rebuild slowly, cautiously, on terms she alone controlled. More importantly, she had watched him build genuine, careful relationships with Kai and Elena, learning to be a father for the very first time, despite having missed the first 5 years of their remarkable lives. The twins, for their part, had grown increasingly comfortable with their father's presence, their initial wariness slowly giving way to a cautious but genuine affection, as Damien consistently demonstrated the patience and sincerity his actions had long been lacking. "Mother," Kai said, appearing beside her, dressed in formal royal attire that still seemed to fit him somewhat awkwardly, though his golden eyes shone with unmistakable pride. "Everyone is waiting." Arya smiled at her son, marveling once again at how much he had grown, not only in physical stature, but in confidence and control over his remarkable abilities that were finally being properly trained by skilled instructors within the kingdom, rather than hidden away in secret forest clearings. "Then let us not keep them waiting any longer," she said, taking both her children's hands as they moved toward the hall's entrance together. The doors opened to reveal a courtyard packed with more people than Arya had ever seen gathered in one place, nobles and commoners alike standing shoulder to shoulder, drawn by the historic significance of the ceremony about to unfold. As Arya stepped forward with her children at her side, a hush fell over the entire crowd, followed almost immediately by a wave of applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the kingdom itself. She was not returning today as a broken exile seeking forgiveness, or a desperate reconciliation with the throne she had once served. She was returning as something far more significant, a woman whose strength and resilience had been proven beyond any doubt, whose children carried a bloodline of extraordinary power that would shape the kingdom's future for generations to come, and whose very presence commanded a respect that no lingering scandal could possibly diminish. Damien waited at the front of the courtyard, dressed in his full royal regalia, his expression a careful mixture of hope and humility as Arya approached. Beside him stood Edwin, representing the Ashwood clan in their newly formalized alliance with the Crimson Moon Kingdom, and Callum, recently promoted to serve as the kingdom's chief advisor following Malric's disgraceful removal from that position. "People of the Crimson Moon Kingdom," Damien announced, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. 5 years ago, this kingdom committed a grave injustice against an innocent woman, banishing her based on lies and manipulation that nearly cost us everything truly valuable about our future. Today, we welcome her return, not merely as a wronged party seeking justice, but as a woman whose extraordinary strength, wisdom, and resilience have proven her to be exactly the kind of leader this kingdom desperately needs. He turned to face Arya directly, his golden eyes filled with genuine emotion as he continued. "Arya Blackwood, this kingdom owes you a debt it can never fully repay. But we offer, today, our deepest respect and gratitude, along with a formal invitation to reclaim your rightful place within these walls, on whatever terms you deem appropriate." Arya looked out at the crowd, at faces that had once condemned her without question, now watching with expressions of genuine respect and admiration, then looked down at her children, whose remarkable strength and resilience had helped bring the truth into the light after 5 long years buried beneath lies and betrayal. "5 years ago," she said, her voice steady and clear, carrying easily across the silent courtyard, "I was cast out of this kingdom, stripped of everything I once called home, forced to rebuild my entire life from nothing, in the depths of an unforgiving forest. I could have let that injustice destroy me. I could have let bitterness consume everything I had left." She paused, looking toward Kai and Elena, both standing tall and proud beside her despite their young age. "Instead, I found strength I never knew I possessed. I found a new family among the Ashwood clan, who took me in with nothing expected in return, and I raised 2 remarkable children who taught me, every single day, that resilience and love could overcome even the deepest betrayal." Turning back to address the crowd directly, she continued, "I do not return today, because I have forgotten what was done to me. I do not return, because 5 years of pain can simply be erased by a formal apology, however sincere. I return, because this kingdom, and its people, deserve a chance to build something better than the corruption and blind trust that once nearly destroyed us all." The crowd erupted into thunderous applause, the weight of her words resonating deeply with a population that had watched their kingdom nearly crumble under the weight of hidden corruption and injustice. Arya felt Kai and Elena squeeze her hands tightly, their own pride evident in their bright, hopeful expressions. As the ceremony concluded and the formal celebrations began, Damien approached Arya quietly, away from the immediate press of the crowd. "Thank you," he said softly, "for giving this kingdom, and giving me, a chance to prove that we can become better than the mistakes of our past." "Do not thank me yet," Arya replied, though her tone carried less hostility than it once might have, softened by months of careful, patient effort on his part. "Earning back what you destroyed will take far longer than a single ceremony, however meaningful, but I am willing to continue building something new, for our children's sake, and perhaps, eventually, for our own." Damien nodded, understanding completely the boundaries she continued to maintain, boundaries she had every right to enforce after everything she had endured. "I will spend as long as it takes," he said quietly, "however many years, however much patience is required." Nearby, Edwin stood speaking with several kingdom officials about the newly formalized alliance between the Ashwood clan and the Crimson Moon Kingdom, an arrangement that would finally bring his long-isolated people back into open contact with the wider world, on terms of equality and respect rather than fear and hiding. Elsie stood beside him, watching the celebration with quiet satisfaction, having played no small part in nursing Arya back to health on that stormy night 5 years earlier, never imagining then how significantly that single act of kindness would eventually reshape an entire kingdom's future. Callum, too, watched the proceedings with quiet pride, remembering the small kindness he had once shown a condemned Luna at the kingdom's border, a gesture he had offered without any expectation of consequence, beyond easing his own conscience. He could not have imagined then that years later he would stand as the kingdom's most trusted advisor, having helped uncover the very truth that restored justice to the woman he had once watched marched away in chains. As the sun began to set over the Crimson Moon Kingdom that evening, casting warm golden light across a courtyard filled with celebration and renewed hope, Arya watched her children laughing together, with newfound friends among the kingdom's young nobility, finally free to embrace their remarkable abilities openly, rather than hiding in fear within a secluded forest clearing. She thought of the storm that had once driven her from these very walls, broken and betrayed, carrying nothing but her unborn children, and a fierce determination to survive against impossible odds. She thought of the years spent rebuilding her strength within the Ashwood clan, of the extraordinary children she had raised, despite every obstacle placed before her. The kingdom that had once cast her aside now watched her with awe and respect, stunned into speechless silence by her strength, her resilience, and the remarkable children who stood as living proof that even the deepest injustice could eventually give way to something far stronger and far more hopeful than anyone could have possibly imagined 5 years earlier. Her story was far from finished. New challenges would undoubtedly arise, new tests of strength and character waiting somewhere on the horizon. But for the first time in 5 long years, Arya Blackwood stood tall, not as a victim of circumstance, but as a woman who had turned devastating betrayal into an extraordinary foundation of strength, ready to face whatever future awaited her and her remarkable children within the kingdom that had finally learned to see her true worth.